Hello and welcome to today's video, and welcome back to my channel. Here today we are talking about my changing tastes in fountain pens. I just kind of want to muse on the pens I've used over the years, just a little bit. And the way I'm going to do that is by talking about the pens I've most used each year. Now, as I've said in previous videos, each year I log what pens I use, how many times I ink them, what ink I use in them, and also the ink capacity of the pen, because it takes longer to work through a 2.5mm pen than it does a 0.7. So my calculations all work out how much ink I've gone through using that pen, and that's how I work this out. What pen I've used the most, what a pen I've written with the most. Now, there's lots of ways I use my pens. I write out lyrics for shows. I do my to-do lists, my bullet journaling. I write out project planning, all of that kind of stuff. My everyday writing, when I'm on tour, it's writing letters back to my daughter and all those kinds of things. So I write quite a lot. I'm taking notes as I'm watching videos about things. I, log my singing practice, all that kind of thing. There's lots and lots that I do. So I use my pens a lot. So each year I can get a really great understanding of what I'm using. Now, when I first started this, the pen that changed me back into being a fountain pen user after all those years was the Lamy AllStar. And so for the first year, this was probably the pen I used absolutely the most, and I used Lamy black cartridges in it. I had come back to pens after a few years away from just using like ballpoints and roller balls for whatever reason. And this pen changed me back, and I'm really glad it did. And then as I started to branch out into other inks, I realized I was going to need a lot more pens, and I got Metropolitans, and I got a bunch of different things. But that first year, this was the pen that I used the most. It was reliable. It wrote really well. Lamy Black is actually quite a nice ink for everyday writing, for carrying around, and you can see, that there's like a few little chips and marks and stuff on it, and like, I love that. Like nothing's perfect, and kind of like it shows your life. It shows that it's been used. And I really enjoy that. So this was the pen in the first year, this is about 2015, 2016, that I probably used more than any. And this is actually before I started logging my pen use. When you've got one or two pens or three pens, it's easy to keep track. But Lamy AllStar was the beginning. In 2017, things took a huge turn in my interest in this. And I added probably more pens in that year than any other year. It's kind of that exploratory stage that we all kind of talk about. And a pen model that I loved, and I'm going to talk about the model because I had many different finishes of it, was the Jinhao X450. And the reason I loved this was because it was a super affordable pen with cool finishes, including this like stunning purple one that it's the only one I have now, and it's the only one I kept. But what I loved about them is that you could replace the nibs, and so I'd buy like a bunch of different nibs from places like Goulet, different size nibs from extra fine through to like some of the the stubborn italic nibs and all of that. I'd even try grinding a few of my own from the Jinhao's nibs that came on them. So it gave you great options, and it was a standard international cartridge converter, so when I traveled a little bit I just put cartridges in it, all that kind of thing. So the X450 model, not this particular one, but the model in general, was right up there in my use. But the pen I used the most in that first year, is when I first started logging my pens, was the TWSBI Diamond 580. I got this pen about halfway through the year from memory, and I just used it non-stop and was refilling, and like the same kinds of inks went through it. Diamine Terracotta was a big one. Diamine Syrah, still one of my absolute favorites, and of course Robert Oster Tranquility, things like that that's in here now. Beautiful inks, and seeing them in the pen, using this lovely pen. So the TWSBI Diamond 580 become sort of the new go-to for me, and I hadn't yet taken huge steps into more expensive pens. That kind of happened the next year. I was still very much just like exploring like the options of what was around in a comfortable price point. But TWSBI was a brand that I had explored with Ecos, and then I moved up to this, which was a really lovely pen, and one that I still really, really enjoy. I should say a lot of the pens I'm covering I have reviewed, and so I will link to a couple of them down in the comments below. If I haven't linked to that particular one, you can search it on my channel if I've done a review of it. As I said, in 2018 things took a bit of a jump, and I got this pen, which is the Diplomat Aero. This was a big jump up in terms of price point for me, but also like in terms of my enjoyment of the pen, not just as a writing tool, but like aesthetically. It was the look of the pen that caught my eye. And then when I started watching reviews of it and noticed that like it just got incredible reviews as having amazing nibs and stuff, I was sold, and literally I bought it, straight up. I still use this all the time. It's got one of my favorite nibs on it. I love the shape and the form of this pen, but it is just super eye-catching. And so in 2018, my most used pen was this, the Diplomat Aero. 2019 saw a really big jump. At the end of 2018, I was involved in a singing competition where I won a prize, and part of that prize was some cash, and I decided to splurge on a pen that I'd wanted for a long time, and it was the Visconti Homo Sapiens Bronze Age. This pen, as if you've followed my channel at all, you know this pen just like, I love this pen. I've nicknamed it Dame Etna, and it's just beautiful. I swapped out the nib from a medium to a fine so I could use it more for everyday writing. The medium was incredibly wet and broad, but this is such a lovely pen. Great size, writes well, decent ink capacity, all of that kind of stuff. Like, what more could you want? If it was half the price, you'd be very, very happy, but at close to $1,000 Australian dollars, this pen kind of, was a big jump up in a lot of ways. But I think what drew me to it was the material, the design, the aesthetic of it. It ticks every box for me, and then just writing with it is just such a gift. Inks I put in this a lot of things like Ackerman Simplicity's Violette, Diamond Oxford Blue occasionally, although it's a bit harder to clean because it's quite saturated. I've had a couple of Lamy inks in here. At one point I had Lamy Petrol in here. I've had Robert Oster inks. Actually, Soda Pop Blue from Robert Oster in this pen is amazing. Tranquility is another great one. Lots of lovely inks, and it's just such a great pen. And it's another one of those pens, because it is quite a wet writer, if the ink is a little drier, it writes with it beautifully. The next pen, which was the pen that I most used in 2020, is one that I had in my collection for a couple of years before this point. But once I was writing more at home, and sort of because of being locked in at home for a year, I found this pen was just suiting all my needs, and I wrote it dry numerous times. I wasn't using as many pens that year, but this pen, the Pilot Custom 823, really got a workout in 2020. It's a beautiful pen. I think it's got an unmatched writing feel, by any other brand. It's got everything you could possibly want. Great size, great ink capacity, beautiful nib, beautiful build quality, all of that kind of stuff. It's just sublime. I've done both review of this pen, but also like a long-term review of it as well, where I talk about why this pen has stayed such a prominent part of my collection. So check those videos out. But this pen, the Pilot Custom 823, in 2020 really, really came into its own, and I think it's been inked up probably at least sort of 2/3 of the time since I've had it, since that point in the last few years, except for when I've been away on tour, when, obviously there's no point in having this inked up, it doesn't come with me on tour. But yeah, it's had a lot of use over the years, and it's a beautiful, beautiful pen. Now I'm going to talk about 2021 and 2022 in the same pen here, because it was the same pen. It was the same most used pen. The Esther Brook Camden. This pen is great. The nib on it, it's a nib made by Schmidt. It's a big pen. It's international standard cartridge converter. And so I've been touring the last couple of years, big chunks of the year. And this pen, because it's robust, it's a good size, it writes well. As I said, I use cartridges when I'm on the road because, when you're flying every sort of few days, it's hard to use, enough ink to, to fill and unfill and all that kind of stuff. And I don't like to fly with ink pens. I've just had too many little incidences where, even if it's just ink in the cap and you take the cap off and you get ink on your page or whatever, it's just easier to replace the ink cartridge. In fact, something that I have done, which I did last year on tour, is every time I took an ink cartridge out, I took it out before I left the hotel, and I had an ink syringe with me, and I flushed the cartridge and I brought it home, and gradually I've been putting those cartridges in the pens that I don't have converters for, so that when I go to use those pens I can just fill up that cartridge that I've used, because I hate throwing it out. and you want less plastic around, and it saves me having to buy converters for a whole lot of pens, particularly some of the pocket pens I've been getting recently. So that's been a really, really great way of doing that. But this pen, the Esther Brook Camden, it got so much use. Those 4 months each year, 5 months first year, 4 months the second year on tour, used non-stop, lots of inks, particularly Diamond I used in it, just non-stop, absolutely non-stop, and wrote, endlessly with them. Even when I was at home, this is one of the pens I would go to, just because like the feel of it in my hand is so good. It's got a great section on it, it's got a great size, and so I was just able to, I was feeling like this pen really ticked a lot of boxes for me, and so it just gets a whole lot of use. So that brings us up to the end of last year, and so the Esther Brook Camden, I decided this year to use it a little bit less. I wanted to try and use a couple of other pens, and so for my tour this year, the Kaweco Original is with me, but the pen that I have used so far the most this year is the Diplomat Excellence A2. Now, as you can see, it is in the evergreen, and I would love this in the black. In fact, it's probably going to be one of my next purchases. It's just such a great pen. It's a really, really great size, and it is, super reliable, and the Diplomat nibs are beautiful. That clicking mechanism, oh, heaven. Just an all-round really, really great pen. It's a pen that I don't think necessarily gets enough attention, maybe because it's a standard, comes with a steel nib, and it does cost a considerable amount more to get one with a gold nib, but it is worth looking at. It's heavy, it's substantial. Just the Diplomat Excellence A2 is such a great pen. So I think my taste in pens kind of ebbs and flows in terms of things like the expense, but what I find most important is a reliable writer. I want a pen that is going to be there every time I need it. When I'm touring, it needs to be robust, because it's not always, going to be in a nice little pen case. It might be in my pocket as we go through airports, or, whatever. I just need it to be robust. I need it to be able to last. I don't want to feel like if I could break this pen, and then, if I'm traveling like last year with only one pen, that was, kind of an important factor for me. Affordability has always been something I appreciate. I can say that even though like a few years ago, my most used pen was the Visconti Homo Sapiens, and that still gets a lot of use. But in terms of things like the TWSBIs and the Jinhaos and the Lamys over the years, all of those kinds of things, they're pens that are, can be on the more affordable side for people. And that's important to me. And I think I'm not a collector of pens. I'm a user of pens. I use it for my writing, and the pens I turn to the most, I turn to primarily because of how they write. It's not about the aesthetic. It's not about like, oh, this is sparkly or this has a great acrylic, even though some of my pens really do, like that Just Turnings Force Awakens pen, or the beautiful Casey Giddens pen that is made of that beautiful burl wood. Amazing, beautiful looking pens. The pens I turn to are the ones that write really well, and they do. And the other pens I've shown you today all write really well. Diplomat is becoming a brand I'm turning to more and more and more. I can't stress enough that those pens are just, so well made and well tuned. And you do pay a little bit more for them, but I think it's worth it. So where do I see my pen collection going from here? Well, I am downsizing. Gradually, bit by bit, I'm moving pens on. I'm either selling them, or I'm gifting them, or, I'm, using them if they're not so great, using them for parts. But I am downsizing my collection. I'd love to get it down to a more manageable amount. I'd love to get it to a point where, like I've got just maybe 30 fountain pens. Even better if I could get it down to 10, but I don't see that as being possible. But if I could get it down a bit, then I end up with a collection that I'm using all the time, and that's kind of important to me as a user of pens. Yes, there are pens I would love to review. I would love to review a Montblanc 149. I'd love to review the Pelican M1000, particularly just because of that amazing nib on it. I'd also love to review things like a Conant bulk filler. And of course, one of my absolute rail pens is the Sailor King of Pen in the Pro Gear version. That pen, like the size of it, everything just kind of makes me very, very excited. But a pen that I'm looking at the moment is the Pilot Custom 845. It's the same nib and vague sort of size as the 823, but the 845 has flat top and end, which for me is awesome. So if I could get that in like a fine nib, I think that would become one of those amazing everyday writer pens that I would just never ever stop writing with. So thank you for watching today. I hope you enjoyed or found something interesting in my little journey through my pen taste and pen use over the years, just a vague musing and sort of talking about how like those tastes changed for me and where I see them going. I'd love to know your thoughts on what you kind of have used over the years and if your tastes have changed and how they've changed. If you want to get in touch with me, you can drop comments here or email me or contact me on any of my social media platforms. Please like and subscribe and all that kind of stuff. It's your support that makes this channel possible. If you'd like to support the channel, by sponsoring a review or providing an item for review, there are many ways we can go about that, and I would love to hear from you. In the meantime, enjoy your pens, whatever they may be, and I'll talk to you soon.